Welcome to More Than Our Story, where we strive to uplift people through sharing inspirational stories. Today I'm joined by Mikaela Barnes, who defines determination and optimism. Mikaela, I'd like to thank you today for joining and sharing your story.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so happy to be here, and I love the premise of this platform. So I'm really excited to chat with you today.
So why don't you take us back to early 2020, before any of this stuff happened? Um, Walk us through a day in your life.
Oh, absolutely. It feels almost like a different lifetime ago to think about pre-COVID, pre-2020. Um, where do I begin? So I, at the time, was living in just outside of Vancouver, where I live now. I'd finished my schooling at Western University. Um, that's how actually we got connected. So you recently interviewed John Salt, who was my spin coach at the Western Triathlon Club in my undergrad. And so he connected us to have this conversation today. And I will say that having the community that I did in the triathlon club at Western was a huge stepping stone to the base that I took forward to pursue marathon training. So in 2020, I had secured my Boston qualification. I completed the BMO Vancouver Marathon in 2019, and then COVID hit. So I was in a bit of a holding pattern, wanting to certainly have the Boston experience that everybody dreams of. I certainly didn't put training to rest. So during 2020, I was going for the sub 3 hour target, even if I did it on my own as a time trial. And one of my good friends will tell me to this day that I picked a terrible route where half of it was on trail. Otherwise, I would have gotten past that 3 hour mark. But I was just trying to avoid traffic during COVID. It's like the least interruptions possible. So I was training quite intensely for marathons at that time, obviously navigating early days of the pandemic, preparing for our wedding. So my husband and I were engaged at the time, and our wedding was scheduled for the summer of 2021. Now, in the months leading up to our wedding day, I started to get some pretty like benign symptoms, truly, in retrospect. Kind of urgently rushing to the bathroom. I thought it was like a digestive irritation or sensitivity of some kind, but unfortunately the symptoms continued, and a couple weeks leading up to our wedding day I had quite extensive investigations because there was a palpable mass right at the basically the end of my digestive tract. So I could actually feel it. It was in my the lowest part of my rectum. And so 4 days before our wedding, I was diagnosed with type 2B/C adenocarcinoma rectal cancer. We got married, and then the following week, I just sort of jumped right into all the medical treatment I needed, which included egg harvesting to preserve fertility going forward, meeting my oncology team for the first time. So that's sort of the 2020 to 2021 landscape that I was living in, which is coming up to 4 years ago.
So not really the honeymoon you had anticipated.
No, we ended up delaying our honeymoon by about a year, and then the following summer we went to Cape Breton for our honeymoon when things had settled a little bit. But yes, jumping into fertility preservation wasn't my idea of a honeymoon, but I'm really glad that we did.
So typically this occurs in people over 50.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever ask yourself why me? Like it.
I mean, many times. There, I think, is likely some sort of like genetic hereditary component that's probably just not identifiable at this point in time. I do have a history, or my family, I should say, has a history of colon rectal cancer on my mom's side. So I do have two relatives that have been diagnosed with colon cancer. They've both completed their treatment and been free of disease, and both of these individuals were diagnosed kind of their early to mid 60s, one in their mid 70s, so certainly much older than I am. Yeah, the why me question comes up a lot. I think one of the most powerful things that was said to me, and this was very early on, and I can picture the room, I can picture everything about the day, and it was actually a week after my diagnosis. So I was diagnosed on a Wednesday. It was 8:04 in the morning. Like, you just never forget kind of those like snapshots in time when that happens. We got married on the Sunday that coming weekend, and then the following week I met my surgeon for the first time. And anytime you meet a colorectal surgeon, you're probably getting a colonoscopy or a sigmoidoscopy or something fun. So I had an appointment with my surgeon for a sigmoidoscopy on the Wednesday. And I remember walking into the room, hadn't even seen him, met him, spoke to him before. And he was in the corner on a computer. And the first thing that he said when I walked into the room is, "This was not your fault." And I don't know if I fully believed him at the time. And I think that's something that I've had to work through a lot, but just that was the first thing he's ever said to me. And I've never forgotten it. And that's been something that I've leaned on whenever I get into those sort of why me spirals.
So can you walk us through a little bit of the timeline of your various, I know you've had more than one diagnosis,
Mhm.
but more so your surgeries and your treatments.
Definitely, definitely. So I had my diagnosis in July of 2021. I had eggs harvested, fortunately, very quickly. And so we have 7 embryos that are frozen and waiting for us when we're ready, which is really exciting. The timing of that I felt was really critical because I was able to complete fertility preservation prior to meeting with my oncology team, where they outlined what was going to be like the best treatment in terms of survivorship, and ideally not having recurrence or not having metastatic disease. And so my initial treatment involved radiation and chemotherapy. And the goal was that between radiation and chemo, that could potentially eradicate the disease such that I wouldn't need surgery. So that was proposed to me at that first meeting. Now, having pelvic radiation would mean that I would not be able to carry a pregnancy because my uterus can't be protected from the radiation field. So that was something where in those first few weeks, we learned that I wouldn't be able to carry a child for us, that we would need a surrogate when we were ready to start building our family. So I had 5 weeks of radiation treatments. That was 5 days a week for 5 weeks. And then I had 4.5 months, so 9 cycles of chemotherapy. What that looked like was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I'd go in for treatment on a Friday, which would be 1 or 2 medications through an IV bag. And then I would leave with an infuser bottle that would slowly infuse a medication over 46 to 48 hours. So every other weekend was a chemo weekend. Just to share a little tidbit from just like the perks of being in the triathlon world, one of the clothing items that I rely on heavily is my bike jerseys because the bottle slides into the bike jersey. I don't have to get like tangled up in the tubing when I'm trying to go to the bathroom and things like that. So I end up wearing bike jerseys most of my chemo weekends just because the storage for the bottle is so convenient. So I completed those 9 cycles of chemo. I did have a complete response, which happens to 30% of individuals after having the radiation and chemo. So at that point in time, I could elect to have the surgery anyways, even though there was nothing there that they could detect on imaging, or I could enter a watch and wait protocol. And if something were to return, that I would have the surgery. Now, the surgery was no walk in the park because of how low my cancer was initially. It would mean having a permanent colostomy. So having a temporary ostomy and then a reconnection after wasn't possible. I would have a permanent colostomy going forward. So there was certainly a big decision to be made with that. It wasn't a simple surgery. It was quite a significant surgery, life-changing in terms of just navigating my body in a different way. Given all the factors in my favor, I did enter the watch and wait protocol. I had 3 months clear scans, 6 months it had come back. So then in September of 2022, I did have the surgery resulting in a permanent colostomy. That week was the deadline to apply for the Boston Marathon for 2023. And so at the time, I could barely stand for 5 seconds. And I think I was walking the length of the hallway, so no more than maybe, I don't know, 100 meters. And I put in my application for the Boston Marathon and was accepted. And so 7 months after my surgery, I ran my best marathon time on record so far, 3 hours and 8 minutes at Boston, and it was amazing. At that time, I had no evidence of disease. I had clear scans at 3, 6, 9 months. And then approaching the 1 year mark, I started to get pain with sitting. And it turns out that there was a new pelvic mass in my pelvic floor muscles next to where my rectum used to be. So this is now the fall of 2023. So I resumed chemotherapy, which I did for 6 months. They added an immunotherapy, which was viciously hard to tolerate in terms of side effects, ultimately shrinking the 2 lesions that were actually in my pelvis. So one I could feel because it was quite close to the surface. The other was a little bit deeper. So ultimately the chemo and immunotherapy were able to shrink both. And then I had another surgery in May of 2024. And that surgery, even though I would have said the first surgery I had was a major surgery, this was above and beyond in terms of a major surgery. So I had actually 2 grafts. So one non-muscle graft on the back of my hip to help fill the space where they resected most of my posterior pelvic floor muscles. And then I also had part of my rectus abdominis, or my six-pack muscle, on the right side of my abdomen. They kept the lower portion attached, flipped it down into my pelvis. So I have a reconstructed vagina and like posterior pelvic floor from these grafts. And so that surgery happened in May. I am up to running 10K at this point. So back to running. I rock climb, so boulder with my husband. I go to Pilates classes. I think whether it be specific to recovering from surgery or just pursuing a marathon, I feel so inspired to find out what my body's capable of. So I feel like whether it's like post-operatively or taking on a new activity, I just want to know what my fullest potential is. So I just don't feel that there's a limitation. It's just a matter of time and putting in the practice, putting in the mundane exercises to build up my capacity again. Now, this wasn't without its own wrinkle because 3 months after my surgery, lymph nodes in my groin became really enlarged, and I had some imaging done, and it confirmed that I had metastatic disease. So at the time, they found some mets in my lungs, potentially my bone of my pelvis, and then there was also a few masses in my pelvis again in the soft tissue. So I just started, or I shouldn't say just, but I resumed chemotherapy in the fall, and I've been having chemotherapy every other week, and now navigating a metastatic chapter to this story. And so far, promising in terms of the lung mets have nearly resolved. The bone mets are not bone mets, but more just scarring from radiation. So we're on track. It's still, not quite linear and clear yet, a little bit in the gray zone, but I'm feeling well. I just finished a cycle of chemo yesterday. I am hoping to run a half marathon in a couple of months in May back at BMO here in Vancouver. Just taking it one day at a time.
So there's a lot of unknown, obviously, that comes with the diagnosis of cancer. How have you managed to maintain your optimism? What do you attribute that to?
Oof. Truthfully, I feel like there's so many layers to that. I think back to just some of the key coaches I had in my early days getting into sport. I mean, certainly you yourself participating in Ironmans, there's just a mental grit that comes from training for those types of events. So a part of it is that for sure. I had phenomenal coaches that really taught me how to, put my head down and work hard, and like it doesn't have to be flashy or fancy, like it's just doing the things that can build up your strength and resilience. And I just had really, really phenomenal influences as I was getting into endurance sport. I feel like another dimension of it is just my knowledge in terms of being a physiotherapist, being a pelvic health physiotherapist. So I think there's been moments where having that deeper knowledge has been really helpful in navigating treatment, minimizing side effects. Um, and I guess the third piece is just kind of this deep, unwavering belief that if anyone can, prove the numbers wrong, it's me. Like, I'm young, I don't have any other comorbidities. And yes, certainly disease can present more aggressive in younger individuals, but I've tolerated treatment really, really well. And when presented with this metastatic chapter, it's very much a game of patience. It's very much a long game, and I kind of feel like all the sport that I participated in to this point has very much been about that. So I'm very much in anything I do for the long run and willing to put in kind of the mundane, the repetitive steps to build up my tolerance. So I guess I just approach this like the unique marathon that it is, 1 kilometer at a time.
You've also sought out alternative treatments, right?
Yes, yes, and I would say, like, it's not to say that I have sort of cultivated this, like, optimism and hope alone. I mean, I have an incredible medical support team, and I know it's not the case for everyone where their medical team kind of feels accessible and supportive, but I've had a very positive relationship with my medical team, and I know wholeheartedly that that's made a big difference in terms of my confidence in navigating each step. Now, what I've explored kind of as a new realm has been acupuncture. So, since getting my metastatic diagnosis at the end of the summer, I was referred to a practitioner here in Vancouver that exclusively sees stage 4 metastatic recurrent cancer patients. And I mentioned having that really profound moment with my surgeon where he said, like, this is not your fault. Like, you didn't do anything to deserve this. And I would say that when I was first presented with this metastatic prognosis and given kind of 2 to 4 years to live, it was sort of like the ground fell out from underneath me again. Like, I kind of thought I was through that or past that, or just I it was, I'd say, as unsettling as the initial diagnosis was at the beginning. And when I met my acupuncturist, he I think the biggest gift he gave me was permission to heal, and also help to strengthen. Like I said, I like have that like unwavering belief, but I feel like it was suppressed or it was put away in a box somewhere and I couldn't access it when I got my metastatic prognosis. So in working with my acupuncturist, not only am I managing side effects of chemo so much better, my sleep is phenomenal, my energy is comparable to like my pre-diagnosis self. He gave me permission to heal and help to restore like an unwavering sense of belief that I can do this or that I can beat the odds. And I'm eternally grateful for that.
You also mentioned last time we spoke, um, the acupuncture managed to improve your blood counts as well.
Yes. So this is a brand new kind of realm for me that I'm learning so much about different styles of acupuncture and what it can help with. And so the acupuncture treatment that I've been receiving is a Japanese style. So the approach is fewer needles is a greater response. And they're really, really, really superficial, like just a couple millimeters into the skin. So not into muscle, not anything deep, not to treat pain, but to help optimize immune system function, help to optimize organ function. And so one of the things that there's been a couple of things that I've noticed. So subjectively, my sleep is like off the charts, like phenomenal in terms of my sleep stats. And I do have an Aura ring, so I'm all up in the data about like how is my sleep, and it's been outstanding since starting acupuncture. And that's alongside like through chemotherapy treatment. Certainly my sleep would be disrupted when I am on the stimulants that help to prevent nausea. So you're having to navigate sort of the ups and downs of side effects of medication that are helpful, but then sometimes not helpful in other areas. But I've even found like my sleep has been less disrupted by even those medications. Certainly my energy is greatly improved. So there's been like amazing subjective reports. But what I'm most blown away by is every 2 weeks I have blood work, and it's around the 12-day mark before having my next cycle at the 14-day mark to see how low my counts drop. So if my counts don't recover between chemo cycles, I'd have to delay a cycle, or like delay by a week and shift the schedule accordingly. So in the 3+ years prior to acupuncture that I was navigating chemo, I would always like just get above the minimum, but it was a close call. And so it felt like with every chemo cycle, it's like, okay, it's a little bit harder to just get past that threshold. So you sort of felt like you were hanging on, and not in a good way. Now with acupuncture, my blood counts have been like mid-range, higher than they've ever been before. So if I was targeting or trying to get above 4 for my white blood cell count, for example, I'm like easily 6, 7, 8 always whenever I go for my blood work. Like it's just not even a variable I'm concerned about anymore.
That's incredible.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's I too do that dance where it's like my blood cell counts have been below like 1, around the 1 mark, so I'll have to retest. I will also look into this acupuncture thing. So
yes, we'll see if we can find someone close to you that could offer a similar treatment, because I'm blown away. And I think even just like mentally not being concerned about that. Like I don't go into my blood work worried about being on the cusp. Like I just trust like my numbers are good. Like schedule is going to go as planned, and I think mentally that does a lot.
speaking of mental health, you've been optimistic throughout your whole cancer journey. Was that always you?
I would say yes. I would say I'm pre-diagnosis an optimist for sure. It's not to say that my optimism hasn't been challenged to the highest degree over the last 4 years, because it absolutely has. And I think where this optimism has changed in terms of, I think, to maybe myself prior to this diagnosis, maybe my level of optimism then could have been maybe misinterpreted as like toxic positivity. And I don't feel like that's where I am now. I have a very real understanding of the factors at play, the diagnosis and the prognosis that I'm navigating. And so it's not from a place of denial. It's very much like I accept the cards that I've been dealt. Whether or not I could have influenced how they unfolded, I'll never know. But all I can do is take care of myself in the present and look towards the future. Now, with that said, I think there's been a huge amount of growth in terms of allowing myself time to grieve. And so it's not that by grieving, by having days that feel hard or frustrated, that I'm any less optimistic. That's just me being a human, and humans are allowed to face all of those emotions. So I think one of the biggest shifts, not so much, I think I've always had the optimism, but I now allow myself time to experience the full spectrum of emotions. And I think that actually fuels me forward versus allowing me to get stuck in the past or to spiral in states that are unhelpful.
So, what would you say your experience has taught you the most?
um, to slow down, to really enjoy the present moment, to get so much joy out of the mundane and just soak up whatever I can out of each day, and each day is a gift. I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring or the day after that. Um, so I think that's a huge piece. And then in the moments where I am not feeling my best, I just remind myself, like, this too shall pass. Like, I can think of times when I was lying in the hospital and the idea of like standing to walk to the bathroom was a marathon, and just trust, like, keep trying and it'll get a little bit easier, a little bit easier. So those hard moments will pass. And I also need to soak up all of the good moments, even if they're fleeting.
So, what would you say to somebody who's going through facing a challenge of their own?
Oof. Um, when facing a challenge of your own, I think, especially if there's a hardship associated with it, if it's something that maybe challenges your belief about yourself, or just like or challenges your trust in your body. I think that's probably one of the biggest obstacles that I've faced, is terms of like restoring a sense of trust in my body and my body's ability to heal. So if I think about what I would say to someone if they kind of started my journey from the beginning, perhaps, or were navigating a health challenge of their own, um, I think the first thing you need to do is you need to feel it all. You need to be in a safe place where you can just let all the emotions surface, the good, the bad, the ugly. And it's, as much as it'd be lovely if it was a one and done, it's not going to be. You're probably going to have to do that multiple times. But there is something really freeing about letting those emotions go versus letting them be suppressed or kind of like ruminate inside. So that would be like my first piece of advice would be allow yourself to feel all the emotions in whatever space feels safe to do so, whether that's on your own, whether that's with other people. And then the other piece to that is like really finding your people, like the sense of community and support that can help you through it. So whether that's a therapist, whether that's elements of your medical team, I think also just being open to like exploring like new treatments and modalities and just finding what works best for you. Because I have certainly tried the gamut of things and felt, okay, this is helpful, this is not. I think there's also like a time where something's going to land and it's going to be really helpful. Like, I think if I had maybe met my acupuncturist 2 years ago, I don't know if I would have had the same response, because I feel there was like just so much going on at the time. So I think even if you are to like explore a new therapy or try something different, is be open to trying it again at a different point in time when your like mental and emotional or physical state is different. Because you can't necessarily throw everything at yourself all at once. I think there's this element of getting into a bit of a groove, especially if it's a long journey ahead, and then adding, you can always add, and it feels better to add than to take away.
So, what do you hope people take away from your story?
Um, I think there'd be a couple pieces. So we haven't talked largely about the fact that I have an ostomy. Um, that for me was a very unsettling possibility. Is what would my life look like? What would I physically be able to do? How would my life be different with or without or with an ostomy, I should say, compared to knowing what it was like without one? Um, there's there's been moments like that where you kind of have to lean into the unknown and you're not sure what to expect on the other side. And so one of the things that I did when I was preparing mentally for potentially needing a surgery, and that for sure resulting in an ostomy, is I Googled marathon running with an ostomy. I thought if I can run a marathon with an ostomy, I can do everything else. So I just need to find someone who's done this before. And I did. I found this incredible individual in the States who has an ostomy and has run marathons. And we like had kind of a meetup like this, and we just chatted it out. And that gave me just such confidence that, okay, if I need that surgery, that's not going to be a hindrance. So I guess like one of the takeaways would be not to, I mean, I guess maybe I'll just use ostomy specifically, but an ostomy is not going to be a barrier in terms of getting back to the things that you enjoy in isolation, appreciating depending on maybe other comorbidities at play or other health implications at play. An ostomy itself is an incredible tool, whether that be navigating like digestive challenges, whether that be related to cancer, and you can rebuild your core, you can rebuild your movement patterns and get back to the things that you want to do. There's nothing that I do that I can't do now that I couldn't before, other than use the toilet like a normal or someone without an ostomy in terms of emptying their bowels. And I would hope that if someone was in a similar position to me and the surgery was presented as a life-saving solution for them, that they could confidently go forward and say, like, I'm going to do this because I know it's going to give me years to my life and not going to hinder the quality of my life. So I think that would be one of the big takeaways for sure. I think the other piece in terms of navigating a health challenge, especially one where perhaps you've been given quite a like short prognosis, is just being open to, like, we don't know what the future holds, whether there's new clinical trials, whether there's new medication. So I guess like the other piece I would want to share is just how important it is to take care of your body right now. And I sort of think, okay, what can I do today? What can I do this week to help preserve my body's ability to take this on for the long run? What's going to give me the best shot in terms of being here to experience the potential opportunities that maybe aren't even like tangible yet? So I guess just having or I guess inspiring the sense of we have one home, one body to take care of. And I think it's like one of the biggest gifts is this opportunity to take care of this vessel and see what's possible.
Well, Mikaela, your resilience, determination, and optimism are just beyond reproach. I think you will give people such confidence navigating their own struggles. I just want to thank you very sincerely for being so open today and for sharing your story. And I really appreciate it. It was wonderful to speak with you.
Oh, my pleasure. I think it's just a new area where being open to managing more things like a chronic disease is sort of the landscape of where health is moving. So, yeah, I guess I hope to be a part of the innovation, whatever that looks like.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Of course. Thank you so much.